Okay, welcome back to Form Check Friday. I am your co-host, Dylan. I'm here with your main host, Bryce. Other
That's
co-host, host.
We can both be co-hosts. That's all right. It doesn't have to be a hierarchical thing.
As always, if you want to submit your lifts, just check out the bio. We have a link that goes to our website, which has a form where you put the video and give us some context into your lifts. There might even be like a video on like what angles we want on that page. I'm not sure, but like,
Might there be?
give us some, like, let us see the lift. You know, don't like have half the video cut off or like some weird ass dark dungeon that you can't see anything. Just give us clips we can actually see. Last week we left off with Francis. This was a 275 for 4 squat. He says he failed his last rep because it was a max out session. Feels like he's been stuck on this weight forever. He's been running Johnny Candido's program for 6 weeks, or the 6-week program. He's been running it for 6 months. He's made steady progress for 3 months, but now he's feeling like he's plateaued. He wants to hit 315 on the squat, and he doesn't want to buy a belt until he hits that. He's been bulking during this period, so he knows that can affect his leverages. And Francis says, I know I go really low when I squat, but I do it so I never have to question depth. I also think I might have a bit of a butt wink. Hope you can help with things I'm not seeing in my technique.
All right, Francis. I got some notes for you. I got some thoughts. So number one, as a sort of precursor to this whole discussion, your squat technique is quite good. You've got a very good looking squat. Your depth is there. You're relatively well braced. That's one of the things we're going to touch on. But I think in the absence of any other changes, if you've been running essentially the same program for 6 months, and this isn't a shot at Candido, but if you do any program too many times without changing enough variables, you can run into some training staleness. And whether that's psychological or actually in how much you're adapting to the training, we're going to run into those kinds of plateaus.
Actually, it's because the program sucks, and you should be running the Calgary Barbell 16-week program.
I mean, I was going to get there without telling anybody that anybody's program sucks.
It's free on our website. Like, you can't beat it. I'm just kidding. Candido's program is...
Candido and Dylan boxing match 2024. We're calling this out. Dylan's only 6 feet tall, so his reach is not that long. Don't worry about it. Anyways, all jokes aside, programming, even just like some novel variations. If you really like what's going on in the Candido program, then just play with some rep ranges, play with some intensities or how it waves throughout its structure. Maybe choose a new assistance exercise or add in one more set per week or play with the intensity. Any number of variables can be tweaked, even a small amount, and that might help you make more progress again. Now, to get to a little bit more of a discussion on your technique here, we can see for sure that there's a really sort of almost exaggerated emphasis on how much you're driving your knees out. Now, that might make it really comfortable to get to this sort of like extremely low depth, but what's happening when we drive back up is you can see how much difference there is in the amount, or sorry, that change in position, right? Pretty substantial. So my first recommendation here is to let those knees go where they're gonna go, let them track forward. That way we're not gonna get this big swing from way out here to in here. It'll, if anything, move slightly, but that slight movement is gonna be easier to control and make consistent than a really big, sort of more wild movement in the knees. So that's number one. Number two is the brace. And I harp on this all the time. I do think that there are some lifters who are going to be pretty comfortable with more of a sort of like chest up, more of an extended brace. But I think in this instance, with that knee movement is coming your change in position, going from this really kind of, so let's look at this torso angle, which I actually quite like, honestly, right there, to where we are when your hips are in a similar height on the way down, right? Very, very different. So what I think we're seeing on the way down is we're seeing you try to really extend. So we're driving the chest up. We're going into a fair bit of extension in the back. and we're going very knees forward. When we come out of the bottom, we're seeing your body put itself in what's presumably a stronger, more natural position for you to produce force. And that's by means of creating this more sort of neutral range position. We're not seeing nearly as much extension. We might even be seeing slight flexion there, which I don't think is a bad thing. And I think if we sort of mimicked where our body is putting us on the way up, if it was more consistent to how we were descending, again, we wouldn't have these great degrees of change in the torso angle, causing the bar to roll on a number of these reps. And we would be able to more reliably train the same positions with the eccentric as we do with the concentric. And between that and the lack or the lessening of the dynamic in changing position from more upright to less upright, I think that we would find a lot more success there. I think probably the biggest thing is going to be, making some changes to the programming. If you've been running the same 6-week block for 6 months, that's a lot. But I do think there are a couple of technical things. Last thing I'm going to mention, because it was in there as context, but you mentioned that you didn't want to get a belt until you hit 315. And I might caution you against a kind of like arbitrary limiter like that. Now, if that's something your heart's set on, that's fine. I mean, I don't think you're gonna, it's not like you can't progress a beltless squat, but adding the belt might allow you to just get that progression going again, which is gonna allow you to feel more attached to or interested in or engaged with your training. And I think those things, especially in the long run, are gonna be more valuable than being able to say that you squatted 315 before you bought a belt. You can still train your beltless squat is the other thing, right? Adding the belt, which might allow you to train yourself to the point where you can squat a lot more than 315, doesn't exclude you from being able to still work up to a 315 beltless squat, is what I'm saying. So do with that information what you will, and I wish you the best of luck on your journey.
I think when I started lifting, I was creating rules like that too. But I think I might have had it set to 315, but I think once I got to like maybe 275, I bought a belt, and it did make it. Well, actually, at first the belt didn't make a difference because I didn't know how to use it. So that's a big thing. But once I knew how to use it, I think it just made everything feel so much better. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't wait, like especially if you do have the money for it and you know you're gonna buy one, you might as well just get one now instead of like waiting. But I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah.
Next up, moving on, we have Sean. This is a 202 for 10 bench. So I think it's in pounds. Yeah. Yeah. Sean says
92.5 kilos.
I'm trying to hit a 275-pound bench at the meet I'm doing mid-January. I've been trying to adjust my foot position for leg drive on these super low competition benches, and I feel like I can drive pretty well. I've been doing these AMRAPs to get a better idea of where my sticking points are and to push myself to not being afraid of failing lifts. I'm failing around the bottom third of the bench rep. What advice would you give?
So failing around the bottom third for a raw lifter is pretty standard. That's generally where we're going to see those lifters fail, right? If it's a strength thing. So, I mean, just get stronger. In all seriousness though, I do think that looking at this, I don't think we lost a whole lot of position. I don't think we did anything weird on the last rep. Like our reps actually look quite consistent throughout. Shoulder position looks good. I'd be cautious with the amount of leg drive you have to make sure, film straight on from the side so you can make sure that your butt's not coming up. But the biggest thing I'm seeing here, and again, this might be intentionally touch and go, but if it's not, got to work on those pauses. And I personally am somebody who believes wholeheartedly that lifters who pause better, bench better. And I think there is a correlation with ensuring that the work that you're doing in almost every scenario is to a competition standard. And lifters that become more and more comfortable with pausing and with that bottom position, again, given that you're missing in that first third of the range of motion, you know, that's further sort of backup for the thought that like, let's train this bottom end more. So if you're not doing long paused variations with probably a decent amount of intensity, I would say generally speaking, you know, if I were to sort of template program without knowing much about you, I would probably use a pretty high intensity for long pause work. I like to use singles on long pause work. I like to use, you know, heavy doubles and triples and get some pretty close to comp weights on the bar. And I also am a big stickler for bench press reps just being paused, right? Having pretty much every bench rep paused to a competition standard, whether that's a close grip variation or high reps or whatever. Now there are exceptions to that once we start getting a little further down the specificity spectrum there, and we start seeing things like feet up, close grip, 2-board bench for 12, like I don't really care if that's paused. But if you're doing a comp bench set of 6 or 8, I want those paused to a competition standard. And if you're not doing a long pause variation right now, get that going. Get that going for sure. Best way to bench more is to bench more. And that sounds like a sassy non-answer, but increasing bench volume, increasing bench frequency, increasing bench exposures, you know, maybe comp bench twice a week. I would say that I have a majority of my lifters doing, I would say the minimum is probably 3 bench exposures per week. And that's for people who run into shoulder issues with more specificity than that. And on the average, I would say 4 or 5 benches per week of, you know, varying amounts of specificity. But, you know, again, benching more often, practicing that pattern more, and definitely pausing more. Those would be my biggest tips, because I think honestly your technique looks quite good here. And I think that you are in a good position with your leg drive and foot position where you're able to create that nice kind of like decline. There's a lot about the bench technique here that looks quite good. So
moving on to our next submission, we have Fabian. This is a
Fabian?
Yeah.
Fabian?
Fabian?
I think usually Fabian.
This is Fabian. This is a 415-pound deadlift. He's doing cluster sets of 3.
Okay.
I recently reintroduced conventional deadlifts into my training because I enjoyed doing them more. I feel like I'm losing back tightness when I'm starting to pull, and it seems like I cannot really take advantage of the belt. I also experimented with purposefully rounding my back a bit more, but that felt pretty inefficient at lockout. Also, I'm not too happy with my neck extending so much when I initiate the pull. It feels like it takes away from my speed from the floor, but I have a hard time cueing myself to look more down. Basically, I want to be able to be more consistent and more efficient in my technique so that I can train the lift for a long time without overthinking so much.
All right. So number one, I think the neck thing is maybe a bit overthinking here. I don't think your head position's bad at all. Like, yeah, you pull it back a little bit and we're maybe a little more extended than, you know, in line with the rest of the trunk, but I don't think that's holding you back. I think the biggest thing here, and I think we talked about this last week actually, is I think you're trying to pull back early, right? I want you, and it seems counterintuitive, but I want you to kind of stay over the bar a little bit more off the floor. I also want you to work on really trying to get those arms long, right? Right now, it looks like we're having to do a lot of like pulling the arms back almost, like you're trying to get retraction in order to get this back position. But what I want is for you to actually like think front pockets, right? So if you're looking at shoulder position for the deadlift from the side and you're kind of up here and forward, then I think what's happening is you're trying to pull the shoulder blade back to counteract that positioning. What I want you to do is think about getting that shoulder blade low and even reaching forward a little bit, right? A little bit of protraction. Now, obviously you can get too much protraction to the point where we're losing back position. Maybe we're getting some weird feelies in the pec or something like that. But generally speaking, we definitely want, I think, more depression, because I mean, it's definitely a leverage thing to some extent. We got a bit of a longer torso here, and I think if we can pull this shoulder blade, or this kind of like anchor point for the deadlift, down more at all, then we're gonna end up with better leverage off the floor. Now, I don't think we actually lose a whole lot of position, but here's another thing that makes me think that we're retracting a lot, is when we lock out, we see this real kind of like stiffness in the upper back. We're trying to like open the chest and pull the shoulder blades back. And if our shoulders are in a good position on the deadlift, you should basically just be able to put your hips through and you're fully erect, fully upright. I was waiting for Dylan to laugh at fully erect, but I guess we're being mature today. Yeah, just getting those shoulder blades down a little bit, I think, is gonna be one of the biggest things for your pull here. Now, in terms of the belt and bracing, I feel like you're tucking it up really high, and I know there's some efficacy there for some people, but I would be tempted to think that putting your belt in more of like a conventional place, you know, a little bit lower, as well as maybe loosening your belt. And I feel like I've been telling a lot of people this lately, you know, loosen the belt. We wanna have room to expand and fill out into the belt. We don't want to crank the belt on such that it's like doing the bracing for us. It's this kind of active versus passive tightness. That's the best way I've been able to kind of explain this concept. But if you crank your belt on really hard, it's gonna make you feel tighter. It's gonna make you feel, you know, like you've got a bit of a brace going all the time. But if you get your belt to the right tightness, where you can actually fill out into it and find that resistance from the belt, and it forces you to work on that kind of like expansion of your trunk, and, you know, using your muscles, it just supplements that, maybe, is a good way of thinking about it, then I think people are getting more out of their belts in that case. So that would be the other thing I would think of. But yeah, definitely more depression. I think we're losing just like a little bit of the potential, you know, kind of bracing contribution coming from the lats. Think about trying to connect your shoulder blades down into your butt, because your butt muscles are doing a lot on the deadlift. And if you can get your brace to kind of connect those two things a little bit better, I think that's going to go a long ways for you. Also, great shirt.
All right. The reason I didn't laugh in the last one was because I was thinking, how do I pronounce this next guy's name at that exact moment? And I'm going to assume it's like Wojciech, maybe, but we'll just call him V. This is a 190 kilo squat. I am 20 years old and have been competing in powerlifting for about 3 years. I compete both equipped and raw. My best numbers in competition are 200 kilo squat, 145 kilo bench, 205 kilo deadlift raw. Equipped numbers are 265 kilo squat, 207.5 kilo bench, and 205 kilo deadlift, since I do not use a suit. I would like to know what to work on to make my squat more efficient. Thank you, and greetings from the Czech Republic.
Sick. Czech Republic's a lot of fun. I think Prague is maybe one of the most fun post powerlifting meet kind of like parties that I've had. Also subsequently one of the worst hangovers I think I've ever had in my life.
But I wouldn't know because I wasn't there.
No, you weren't. You weren't. Anyways, so couple things here, Wojciech. I think Wojciech sounds like the right way to say it. Did you look it up?
No.
No. You got that intuition.
Well, I mean, my last name is Jakovac, but it's spelled Jakovac. So
yeah. Okay, so a couple things. Probably going to sound pretty familiar to a lot of people who watch. Number one, turn around. Don't look in the mirror. Mirrors are not great for powerlifting training. Period. And it looks like it's gonna be super easy. Just take these hooks, put them over here, and face out. That's number one. Number two, I'm gonna say it again, loosen the belt just a tiny bit. Just a tiny bit, maybe one notch. Looks like that's maybe an SBD belt, which, the best belt on the market if you ask me. So loosen it like one notch. So again, so you can fill out into it more as opposed to it just being clamped on really tight. Now, the other time that I actually discuss this kind of like active versus passive tightness is often when talking about the upper back and the shelf in the squat. And the sort of passive tightness can come from really jamming your hands in. But if we watch the squat, there's actually a decent bit of movement in the shoulder, and that bar even moves around slightly on your back. So what I think would be useful for you here is to widen your grip just ever so slightly, like 1 finger width. And I think what that does is it allows the lifter a little bit more room to actively pull those elbows in towards the sides and find more active upper back tightness and tension for the shelf there. Lastly, I think we are initiating with a decent bit of extension. I think if you can, you know, again, clamp the ribs down just a little bit and think about, you know, tilting a little more intentionally, that might help as well. I think that would be pretty much all I would see there, because you can see, especially on this rep, it's pretty apparent the little bar movement and kind of shoulder shrug that we have to do to maintain the bar position out of the bottom on a couple of those reps. So I think the upper back tightness is gonna be aided and assisted by loosening the belt so we can brace a bit bigger into the belt and keeping the ribs down just slightly more, keeping that pelvis in more of a sort of like neutral position as opposed to being in that little bit of lordosis or lumbopelvic extension, whatever the hell you wanna call it. Depth looks pretty damn solid. Hard to tell from this angle, but yeah, those would be the things that I would say you could probably tweak a little bit to become slightly more efficient. Now, overall, your squat is fantastic, honestly, but those would be things that I would play with to try to take it to the next level.
All right, that brings us to our last submission. This is Steve. We have a 315-pound bench single. I want to stop moving around so much. It looks like I'm squirming when I bench, and my arms have a tendency to shake as well. Also need to know if I'm tucking my arms enough.
All right, so as you all know, this is beyond my pay grade now. We do 4, that's it. So you're gonna have to leave Steve some comments in the comment section below and give him your best advice on his bench press here. Constructive criticisms, you know, help each other out. Have you dealt with these kinds of things? If so, how did you overcome it? Make sure that if you like form checks and you want more of them and you want to hang out with Dylan and I, that you come by the live streams. They happen every Friday, which is today. May have already happened, or does this come out first usually?
This comes out first.
Do the live stream thing, and we'll see you there. If you want to submit, again, check the description link below.
This comes out first, but this day we might not be streaming.
Right.
Because it's almost a new year.
This
is December 29th.
Oh yeah, we've time traveled.
Yep.
Still talking on this outro, so like and subscribe. Bye.